Hello and welcome back to Custode Central. Today we're going to have a medium length video talking about how to update your list to deal with the new Ad Mech codex. Started having a quick look through, not a long-term Ad Mech player, but got a copy of the codex and started to look through it and thought, hey, there are a few things here that really jump out at me and it's probably something to be aware of from a Custodes perspective. So first things first, Cognis last cannons going from D6 to 3 plus D3 damage is very significant because this changes your average output from 3.5 to 5. And for damage reduction units, this jumps from 2.67 to 4, which is a 50% increase in damage. And it doesn't go from 3.5 to 2.5 because damage 1 doesn't get reduced to 0. So that's why it's a weird looking number here. Now, the army rules have changed, so it's not quite like a 1-for-1. But it's good to understand kind of the baseline increase. And I think the easiest way to kind of illustrate this is if we take a baseline Telemon with no buffs, it's got 14 wounds and a 6-up feel no pain. It's way easier to calculate this by stripping out the feel no pain and just treating it as having 16.8 wounds, because that's effectively how many you have if you didn't have feel no pain. And versus D6, where you're doing average 2.67, you needed 6.3 failed saves. And to get that many failed saves, you needed 12.6 wounds. To get this many wounds, you needed 8.9 hits. And to get 18.9 hits, you need 28.4 shots at BS3 previously. But now, because your last cannons are doing 3 plus D3, and you're now doing average 4 damage, you only need 4.2 failed saves. And that equates to 8.4 wounds. And to get that many wounds, you need only 12.6 hits. And so that means you now only need like 19 shots at BS3. So, this is how you visualize the 50% reduction or the 50% increase in damage output. Now, in real games, both sides are going to have buffs, but they're basically going to probably, if they were dying before, they're probably going to die a turn earlier than they were previously. So let's get to the meat of the video, and that is looking at the troop slots. So these are Vanguards, they're 8 points per model, they're ballistic skill 3, they move 6, they've got an 18-inch assault 3, strength 3, AP 0, damage 1 gun, and they auto wound non-vehicles on a 6 to hit. And that was fine. Usually you used to see them in units of 5 or 10. 10 if they were going into transport to fight for a primary, but usually you just saw them as troop attacks sitting at the back. But now they can go to squad size of 20. Now they can go to a squad size of 20. It's now worth taking the data tether that gives them +1 leadership and allows them to be buffed by army buffs from a longer range. And they can get an Omni for 5 points, which allows the unit to ignore light cover when they shoot at something. And obviously it wasn't really worth it when they had 5 of them, but now you've got a squad of 20, it is worthwhile. Now, all that said, doesn't seem that scary when you're a Custodes army because you save on 2s, because they have AP 0. Rangers, ballistic skill 3, also 8 points per model. They move 6, they have a 30-inch heavy 2 gun at strength 4, AP 1, damage 1. Now, anything with AP kind of concerns us when they have weight of shots, because we want to be saving on 2s, not 3s. Squad size went up to 20 as well. Same deal with the data tether and the Omni. Obviously, being able to ignore light cover and being AP1 and having 40 shots in a squad of 20 is quite a big deal. But we can still save some stuff on 2s and some stuff on 3s. So our Terminators using the Stratagem, our Shield Guard, because they're natively 1-up, they will still save on 2s, but everything else is basically going to be saving on 3s because they ignore light cover. So what are the stratagems that make Rangers and make Vanguard and Rangers scary? So for the Vanguard, it's enriched rounds, and this relates to radiant weapons will auto wound on an unmodified 4+2 hit versus non-vehicles for 1 CP. And considering when you've got 20 of them, that's 60 shots, you're now getting 30 auto wounds. You don't have to think about the hits and the wounds. You just purely from the auto wounds. That's just 30 auto wounds. It's a lot. It's a lot of saves, even to make on 2+, right? That's still 5 wounds that are going through 2+ saves. Galvanic Volley Fire is for Rangers, and this will change their Heavy 2 into Rapid Fire 2. This costs 2 CP. So now we're looking at 80 shots within 15 inches at strength 4 AP1. And again, because they're ignoring light cover, AP1 is pretty significant. Ad Mech also have access to a Forge World. They get rad saturated, so core units targeted from more than 12 inches away are treated as being shot with -1 strength on the profile. This affects the durability, which is pretty nice, but we don't care about it too much in this video because we're more looking at their damage output. Damage output is boosted significantly for the Vanguard with scarifying weaponry, which will add +1 strength and AP to radiant weapons. So now your strength 3 AP 0 goes to strength 4 AP 1. And again, because they're ignoring light cover, this is very significant, especially since they're auto wounding. So now you get 30 plus AP 1 auto wounds with the stratagem. The custom forge wall doesn't do anything for the rangers. They're still at 80 shots within 15 inches, strength 4 AP 1. What are some additional buffs that Ad Mech could do? So they can get reroll 1s pretty freely with a Martial or a Dominus as an aura. The Martial is giving a reroll 1's aura to wound. The Martial can also take a relic to give both reroll 1s to hit and reroll 1s to wound. You can get an additional AP on the board if you get buffed by a Manipulus during the command phase. You can get additional strength if you get buffed by a Manipulus during the command phase as well, but probably the strength upgrade is more likely going to go on to Autocannon Ballistari. But keep in mind, it could go on to a 20 Skitarii blob. Haven't mathed which one would be better, actually. Probably depends what they're trying to kill. They also get access to +1 ballistic skill for a turn via Doctrina Imperatives. There are some downsides to this, but they probably care much more about being +1 to hit for the army on Skitarii units for the turn. So in a worst case scenario, if they are from the Rad Saturated Forge world, so they are strength 4 AP 1 on the carbines, and then they get the +1 strength from a Manipulus, and they get +1 AP from another Manipulus, you could be looking at 60 strength 5 AP 2 that auto win on 4+ unmodified versus non-vehicles. That's frightening, basically. Also, you could have, theoretically, you could have 80 within 15 inches, strength 5 because +1 strength from the Manipulus, AP 2 because +1 AP from the Manipulus, but I don't think this profile is something that you are likely to commonly see, because it just seems to me that you're way more likely to spend the Manipulus buff somewhere else. So let's have a look at the delivery systems. So because you need to be within rapid fire range to really get the benefit out of the strat for the rangers, you're looking at 15 inches. And for the Vanguard, it's 18 inches, but there are assault weapons that they can advance. So you have to think of their threat range as 6 plus d6 plus 18. Now, if you want to get the bonus AP from the Manipulus, they have to start on the board because they have to be buffed during the command phase. So if they are strategic reserving, they are not on the board during the command phase, so they can't get buffed for the extra AP. So what you start with is what you shoot with. So typically when they outflank, you're going to see 80 shots at strength 4 AP 1 from the Rangers, or you're going to see 60 strength 4 AP 1 shots from the scarifying weaponry Vanguard. From deployment, though, you could get kind of different profiles, but there's too many variations to go over. But these yellow numbers are kind of what you should be thinking out in terms of, if they're coming in from reserves, this is probably the profile that they're going to shoot with. Which is still pretty scary, to be honest. This is a lot of shots, especially when this is auto winning with AP and ignoring light cover. So the delivery system is part of the issue with this combo, though. So terrain saves us a lot because there should be a decent amount of obscuring terrain in the middle, and there should be obscuring terrain along the board, well, not along the board edges, but kind of somewhat inset from the board edges. And what this means is if they come in 6 inches from a board edge, they can't all be, touching a ruin, for example. Maybe like the first rank or something like that will get to shoot. And otherwise it will block out line of sight. So you need to start thinking like, how do you screen your board edges with something that you don't mind getting shot to prevent a unit that you do mind getting shot being shot by this horrifying horde of Skitarii, basically. So this is to say, basically, although it looks really horrendous looking at these numbers, it's not always going to be that bad. Because of terrain, basically. Terrain's going to save you. Terrain's your friend. Terrain's always your friend when you're a Custodes army. So this is how I think competitive Ad Mech is likely to kind of look like, and it's along the lines of what I'm testing at the moment. So while the Rad Saturated Forge World gives you the most kind of bang for buck in terms of +1 strength, -1 AP, I think if you can't get the angles to shoot the units that you really want to shoot, there's no benefit having like the super cool combo that makes, the math super amazing if they never get to shoot the ideal target. So in my opinion, I think Lucius is a much better kind of forge world for this sort of tactic, because it makes delivery of your units better. And as long as you're pushing people to save on threes after the AP, I think this is fine for tactical flexibility. So what Lucius gives you is plus 3 inches range to model range weapons. And when you're starting with 15 inches or 18 inches, this is pretty significant. It's way more than getting 3 inches extra on a 30-inch weapon, for example. You get plus 1 to your save versus damage 1 all the time. You get a solar flare relic, which is basically a veil of darkness. So you pick a unit next to your character that has the relic. They get to teleport, and because it's not a reinforcement, they get to teleport turn 1 in GT. You get access to a 1 CP stratagem to put a non-vehicle unit into Deep Strike, and you can use this twice at 2,000 points. And Deep Strike is better than Strategic Reserve. Well, they're both in Strategic Reserve, but it's better than Outflank because you don't need to come in from a board edge, so you can't get blocked by these obscuring bits of terrain on the edges. Being able to place in the middle of the board opens up way more angles for you and makes screening against you like 3 times as hard. What's the other thing they got? They have a Forge World specific Warlord trait that they can target a unit during their command phase, and that unit gets transhuman until the next command phase. That's a really long time. It's really, really good. So this is a sample Lucius list extract that I've been working on, and this has a Manipulus having the Warlord trait for the targeted transhuman. Also has a Holy Order where the first part of the order is a targeted Ignore AP1, AP2 on core units. And in addition, because I have a Holy Order, I get a discount of 1 CP on a stratagem once per game, but still pretty nice. I have a Marshal who has an additional relic, Solar Flare. This is the Veil of Darkness, basically, and an additional Warlord trait to allow a unit to fall back and shoot. The rest of this is 120 unit of Rangers with Omni and Datateller for 170, and 2 units of Vanguard with Omni and Datateller also for 170. So how does this list work in practice? It's not a full list, obviously, but this is just the basis of a list. So in theory, during deployment, you just pay the 2 CP to Deep Strike, a Vanguard, and a Ranger squad. And at the first battle round, you typically will pick +1 save or +1 ballistic skill. I think people should tend to pick +1 save because you have to pick this before you know who goes first. So typically I'd say you pick +1 to save. You lose -3 inches of movement, but I think that's probably fine for what we are looking to achieve in turn 1. During deployment, you want to stick your Vanguard squad that's starting on the board within 6 inches of your Manipulus and your Marshal, and you are going to buff them with everything. So they're going to get the Transhuman buff. They're going to get the Ignore AP1, AP2 buff. You're going to give them additional range and AP with the Manipulus. And remember, versus damage 1, they're getting an additional +1 save. So they're effectively 2-up save versus damage 1, Transhuman, and they ignore AP1, AP2 on a 20-man unit. It's pretty hard to shift. During your movement phase, you're basically going to veil your Marshal and your Vanguard squad, which you've buffed, and you're gonna it's like a point-and-click adventure into your non-vehicle unit that you want to kill. And remember, because they've been buffed, they've now got AP1 for the Manipulus, and you'll be auto-winning on falls to hit. What I think you should do is bubble wrap your Marshal with your Vanguard squad in a tilted square formation, so it's harder to wrap you. Rather than giving them the flat surface, give them a corner as the closest part to them. Obviously making sure everybody's in range. In turn 2, probably I want to say your Marshal lived, unless they were really, really offended by him being where he is with his squad. And ideally you want him to live so that he can buff the units coming in turn 2, or maybe some units are moving up because he's giving a reroll 1s to Wound Aura. The Vanguard unit may or may not have lived. Obviously, very, very hard to shift. Otherwise, they're going to have to eat shots that really don't want to be shooting a Vanguard unit. Now, a Ranger squad can just deep strike anywhere freely because of the Lucius stratagem. You've got Strength 4, you've got AP1, you've got 80 shots, go nuts, right? They kind of don't need that much beyond it. If you happen to be Mars, the Wrath of Mars, you're definitely going to get sixes to wound. So don't even worry about that. If you just want to dump mortal wounds with Mars, you can do that as well. But obviously here we're Lucius, so they wouldn't be deep striking in Mars Detachment. The Vanguard squad can deep strike as well, because you can deep strike 2 units, and they can do the auto-winning strat again versus non-vehicles. And what you're really trying to do is push somebody to a 3-up save or worse. Obviously, because they didn't start on the board, they can't get the buff from the Manipulus, so they're AP 0. But, Space Marines are on 3-ups, and there are lots of armies on way worse than 3-up saves. The alternative you can do is drop them where the first squad of Vanguard originally deployed, so that on turn 3 they can be buffed by the Manipulus, they can advance and they can shoot and they can use the stratagem again. And that may be better because you have extra AP, and the AP makes a very significant difference in damage output. So let's have a look at some expected outputs in terms of math. Rangers are base strength 4 AP 1, rapid fire 2. So what are they really good into in a Custodes army? And I think they are good into T5 or below. And the reason is if they target bikes, which are T6, you can grim them, and because they have to actually roll to wound, if they have to wound on 6s, this is going to halve their damage output. And that's not so good anymore. So if your bikes, it's not good to get shot by Rangers ever, like 80 shots. It's never good to get shot by 80 shots. But if you have to get shot by 80 shots and it's going to be your bikes, it may not be the worst target because Grim Responsibility will actually help you out here a bit. Now, if we're just doing the 80 shots and we're assuming no rerolls, but they are +1 ballistic skill because it's turn 2, that's most likely Doctrina that's going to be active that turn. You're looking at 67 hits, and when you're winning on a 5+, you're looking at 22 wounds. If you're saving on 3s, you are going to take about 7. And if you're saving on 2s, you're going to take about 3 to 4. It's not too bad. It's not good. It's not too bad, though. Now, it is really easy to get reroll 1s to hit and reroll 1s to wound in a Scutari army, just because of a Marshal, Dominus, etc. being everywhere. So if you did reroll 1s to hit, you now get 77.7 hits. And if you reroll 1s to wound as well, you now end up with 30 wounds. So here, if you save on 3s, you're now taking 10. And if you save on 2s, you are taking 5. Now, you can save on 2s even though it's -1 ignore AP if you're a Terminator and you pop the strat, or you're a Shield Guard because you start base on a 1-up and you go to a 2-up. So other than that, you're saving on 3s. That's gonna leave it then. Additionally, if you happen to be a T7 Dreadnought and you have used Grim somewhere else that turn, you're just probably going to take if you can't turn off the strength and you can't turn off the rerolls, you're probably going to take like 10 wounds before Feel No Pain. That's a chunk out of a Contemptor. Yeah, that's not good. Scarifying Weaponry, Vanguard, these are the +1 strength AP1 guys, so they're strength 4 AP1 and assault 3 auto win on 4s. These are really good. What are they really good into? Non-vehicles which save on 3+ or worse. So Grim Responsibility here doesn't matter so much because the vast majority of the damage is actually coming through the Stratagem, which auto wins on 4s. So we don't care about shifting their breakpoints for wounding rolls. So assuming no rerolls, but assuming +1 ballistic skill Doctrina turn 2, you're looking at 30 auto wounds plus 7 to 8 kind of normal wounds. So that's 38 wounds. Now, if you're saving this on 3s, which you could easily be because it's -1, that's like 12 and a bit wounds. That's most of a squad of infantry. That's bad. So you need to keep this in mind. Like, you need to respect this unit when it comes out of deep strike and where it could deep strike. And this always goes back to screening. So you have to, when thinking about playing Ad Mech that has reserves of huge blocks of infantry, you need to be thinking screening, because stuff is going to die. Now, if you reroll 1s to hit and you reroll 1s to wound and you're on +1 ballistic skill, you're now looking at 44 wounds. And if you're saving this on 3s, you're looking at, math is hard, like 14 wounds. And if you're saving this on 2s, you are looking at 7 and a bit, which isn't too bad, but it's still pretty significant. But obviously, it's much better to save on 2s than it is on 3s, because that's the difference between losing most of a squad and losing half a squad. Now, expected output if they're not if they're not scarifying, if they're not the custom forge wall, basically. So the ranges stay the same. We don't really care about this. The main thing is just to always compare, like, these are the wounds that you're going to get without buffs, assuming +1 ballistic skill. And this is the +1 ballistic skill rerolling ones to hit and wound. And if you're saving on 3s, you divide this number by 3. And if you're saving on 2s, you divide this number by 6. Now, the Vanguard, when they don't have buffs, they're just strength 3 AP 0. These numbers don't change, right? Because they're still hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s, and they're winning on 5s, right? Where this could change is versus infantry. Actually, no, even then we don't care, because even if you go to strength 2, the vast majority of the wounds are actually coming from the auto wounds. So it's probably not worth it. Like, if you have to take 44 saves, even on a 2-up, that's still 7 wounds that go through on a 2-up. So, yeah, it's better than taking 14, but it is still a lot. So, you used to think of Shield Guard as being invincible versus AP 0. It's not when you're taking this many wounds. So what does this mean for Custodes? I think this means if your list didn't take a Vex, you were getting by on like Dents being somewhere on the table. I think you should just take a Vex. And if you still think you don't need a Vex, I think you should think about it again. Keep in mind, ignoring the stratagems which auto wound on hits, if you push a 3-up to a 4-up, that's a 25% reduction in damage. And if you push a 2-up to a 3-up, that's a 20% reduction in damage. Keep in mind a Vex can cover a wide array of units. So if you stop like a third of your army taking 20% less damage, that's very worthwhile for 120-ish points. The other thing to kind of do is to understand the expected outputs and kind of get an idea of what certain units can do in a combination. And what this means is previously you were probably using your Vexilla to protect your vehicles and dreadnoughts, because the Ad Mech little guns weren't so threatening to your infantry moving up the board. That's no longer the case. Their Ad Mech little guns are now death by 1,000 cuts. So you may want to reconsider, like, what's more important to the long-term victory of the mission, right? Do you need to hold this primary, which is the weaker side? How long do you have to hold this for? So this may affect the side of the board that you want to put your Vex. It may affect which stratagems you want to use and which units. And it may result in that you want to dump strats and Vex on your infantry instead of your vehicles. Now, it's a bit of a rough spot because obviously life got harder for vehicles as well with the last cannon changes, the Cognos last cannons. But this is just the tough world that you live in with the Ad Mech Codex. Now, if you're a non-vehicle, just because of the existence of this Vanguard stratagem, you want to be able to save on a 2+ after the AP. So that means you want to be Shield Guard or you want to be Terminator so you can pop the strat. Vanguard are still effective versus 2-up saves just because of the sheer number of armor saves they force you to take with the auto wound strat. But Rangers, not so much. Rangers, not so much. Because they actually have to roll to wound you. It's much less. It's much less. So if you can save versus Rangers on 2-up, you are pretty happy. Obviously, nobody enjoys being hit by 80 shots, but this is kind of as best as you can do. And also against Rangers, unless they have somehow been buffed to strength 5, keep in mind you can, your bikes, your dreadnoughts can grim them, and this will cut their output in half because now they're winning on 6s instead of 5s. If you have only just kind of started to think about screening and what screening means, now is a really good time to really focus on it versus Ad Mech if they have deep strikes or reserves, because you need to be thinking from turn 2, like, I play on TTS, so at the start of turn 2, I start making 9-inch bubbles everywhere, and I think, what can I screen, what can I not screen? If I don't screen, what's the worst possible thing that could happen, right? And that could mean, you lose 2 objectives. It's really bad. So you need to start thinking about this, in your backfield and also moving up the board. If they can't deep strike and they have to come in from board edges, what's a sacrificial unit you could put up to cover a board edge and, cover like some obscuring terrain near the edges that are kind of long and block off like a huge amount of the board, right? Or they have to come in from their board edge. but then you're probably not close enough to be shot by them turn 2. Let's have a look. And yeah, so I mean, it's a bit boring, but the kind of conclusion that this pushes you to is take more dreadnoughts, because dreadnoughts aren't vehicles, so you can't get punished by the Vanguard. You can usually Grim Resolve versus the Rangers, because they're going to strength 3 and you're T7. So now they're winning on 6s. So it's a bit of a boring playstyle. I mean, I think most of the competitive Custodes lists have got like 3, 4, 5 dreadnoughts in them, and this is just more reason to continue piling on the dreadnoughts for now, because -1 strength works against lots of things, and it's really good. So this is still the case. This is especially more the case after the release of Ad Mech and Drukhari. I haven't looked too much into the Drukhari Codex. I've played a couple of times into Drukhari. It is mental. It is mental. It reminds me of playing into Sisters of Battle on steroids, right? Because they've got flying rhinos, they've got the advance and charge, and they move really, really far. And instead of only 3 units of Repentia, you have like 5 units that will just blend you with like 20, 30, 40 attacks with damage too. And that's the reason why I think Dreads are good, because A, it makes it harder to wound you. B, taking 1 damage instead of 2 damage is really, really good. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at in the competitive. I think if you're a pure custode player, with the Ad Mech Codex and the change to the secondaries and the fact that a lot of the secondaries are action based and it's really hard to do actions as a custode player, like life is getting tough. Life is getting tough. Anyway, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if there's any video content that you'd like me to cover in the near future, and you think it'd be interesting, do let me know in the comments below. And I'll see you guys next time. Thanks very much.